Look that country up, it'll blow your mind. Slaves get there from a plantation, they went there completely, had no idea what they were doing. They enslaved the native population, built their own plantations, and tried to grow corn, wheat, and cotton in Africa. Can't do it, it failed. Crazy history for that country, which I could talk about a lot, but I'm already sidetracking myself a lot. So, the Missouri Compromise, this is in 1820. So, what happened basically is that Missouri wants to become a state, and it really, really wants to be a slave state, really badly. But what the Union is trying to do is keep an equal amount of slave and free states. So, they almost admit Missouri, and they're like, okay, you can have slavery, but you're going to have slavery for this long, and all these other things. It didn't get passed. It got shut down by the House. And then it tries to go up again, but this time Alabama has become a state. And we're like, well, yeah, you got one more extra slave state, we can't make another one. So they decide to, actually, I don't want to say decide to, but so basically what happens, Maine became a free state, Missouri became a slave state. Equal the numbers out. And this is a huge thing, because basically what the law says is that from now on, this line right here, 3630, slavery can only exist below this line, except for Missouri. Only here, except for Missouri. No matter what happens over here, all this is going to be free. This is where you can have slavery if you really want it, except for Missouri. So this, to a lot of people's minds, like stops the debate. They're like, oh, finally we've agreed on something. It became known as the Sacred Pledge.
We don't call it that in Texas. We had banned slavery many years before in the nation of Texas, but was required to make it legal again in order to enter the Union.
That's insane. I did not know that. Thank you. Sort of. I've just been reading so much depressing shit lately, so that doesn't help. So this happened in 1820, and so this huge thing happened, which is the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And so what happened with Kansas is they're like, okay, slaves, and Kansas, we're going to go with popular sovereignty. We're not going to listen to the Missouri Compromise anymore. The Sacred Pledge. We're going to say if it's a bunch of slave owners that move to Kansas, it's a slave state. If it's a bunch of free soilers that move to Kansas, it's a free state. So what happened? You have all these people arguing all the time about this giant, huge debate. So in 1854, when this happened, you got just organizations were springing up just to pay people to move there based on what sort of faction they're on. So it becomes this war-torn area. They refer to this as Bleeding Kansas. So John Brown, I believe right now he's living up in North Elba in New York. No? It's very beautiful up there. Anyway, that's where he's buried. So anyway, he sends a shit ton of his sons down. They're just like, he's like, get down to Kansas, you know, free Kansas. But for the mindset of the American people right now, it's this huge deal because this compromise that they had before was just decimated. And so many people are just pissed off about it. Give me 1 second. Okay, yeah. So what happened in government right now is, so you have this Whig party, and the Whig party was like, I need to jump to John Brown, don't I? Am I fucking up here? Alright, so how much time do I have?
45 minutes.
What's up?
45 minutes.
Alright, never mind.
Yeah. Been going for like half an hour.
Okay, great. So, I mean, it really ruined people's faith in the government that they had passed this. It had become part of America. Social Security or something, like it's like when that gets starting to take away, like, no, but that's what, anyway. So that happened. So he's down there, and eventually he gets down there, and all his sons are like, dude, you have to move to Kansas. We're sending these letters, Dad, you gotta get here. It's insane. There's all of these slave owners. There's like slave owners across the river, you know. And I'm sure to them up in New York, they're like, it exists. Here's that thing. And you know, and fear was just spreading across the United States. But that's like New York started having headlines about like, you know, New York could be a slave state again next year. Battery Park will be overrun with slaves. And so John Brown moves back down there. He moves to Kansas. And while he's living down there, a couple of things happen. One thing happens is the Dred Scott decision. Dred Scott was a slave who, his owner was this guy Emerson, who was like an army, he was like a physician. And so Emerson's jumping around a lot. So he like goes and lives in Illinois, he goes and lives in Michigan, he lives in Missouri, he lives all over the place, and Dred Scott goes with him. He spends 4 years on free soil. He marries a free black woman. And then he's moved back down to Louisiana, I believe. And is that right? I think that's right. It's Mississippi. Mississippi. So, now let me get this right. It matters. I haven't got to Sumner yet. Okay, yeah. Right, okay. So, Mississippi, 1846. Dred Scott sues. He sues for his freedom. For many reasons. It's like, okay, you know, I had a kid while I was on the river, actually on a riverboat. According to those laws, I should be free by now. I lived this amount of years in a free state, I should be free by now. I married a free black woman, I should be free by now. And so, he wins the case. And then it gets appealed by the state. And he loses. And then they eventually go to the Supreme Court. And so the Supreme Court, they basically asked themselves these three questions. Did Dred Scott have the right to sue for anything in a federal court because he was a black guy? Did Scott's residence on free soil entitle him to freedom? And did the law of master and slave have any jurisdiction over the law of the territories? And was Congress right to determine slavery at all? And so this awful man makes this ruling. Anyway, he went a little too far in answering the question. I guess is how I'll put that. No, Scott whether decided whether Scott had no right, his residence didn't matter, and Congress had no right to exclude slavery from any state was according to the Fifth Amendment, because slaves were property. It would be unconstitutional for the federal court to fuck with their property. But the head judge went so far as to say Negroes had for more than a century been regarded as beings of an inferior order, so far inferior that they had no rights that the white man was bound to respect. So here's the Supreme Court, and so everything changes. It meant that there was no compromise. There was no feeling of security in free states. At any point, it could change. It destroyed compromise, ruined moderation. You had a lot of, people in politics sort of saying, "Oh, I'm over here." Anyway, so after that happened, anyway, another thing that happened. I'll go there. So Sumner. Sumner is one of only two abolitionists in the House of Representatives, and they kept they would kind of shut him up for a really long time. They wouldn't let him speak ever. He's a Harvard man. He's a conscious Whig. And he gave this speech, and he printed up copies of it, and sent them out in circulation that day. It was called "The Crime Against Kansas." It was 6 hours. 6 hours long. It's about 40 pages. And he laced the speech with personal attacks about slave owners only really wanted slaves so that they could rape their slaves. So Butler, this guy Butler from South Carolina, he called Butler a Don Quixote who had taken the harlot slavery as his mistress. And so this guy Brooks was Butler's nephew. And so Brooks, Butler. So Butler didn't know what to do. He he felt really insulted when the South was insulted, slavery was insulted, So he talks to his friends. He's like, I'm going to challenge this guy Sumner to a duel.
Yeah.
Duels didn't really happen anymore. And they're like, well, they tried to talk him out of it, I think. And they're like, no, don't do that. But the reason was that he's not a gentleman. He used these words, in the house itself. How dare you? So his response. So Sumner's sitting there signing copies of his speech. Butler just walks up to him with a cane and just starts beating the shit out of him in the house. You know what I mean? Anyway. So Sumner gets stuck under this desk and he's just getting his head bashed in. And some people are trying to stop, but not really. There's a lot of people just literally kind of being just let him figure it out. So Brooks then tenders his resignation. That was Brooks, I forget. Anyway, so he tenders his resignation and is immediately reelected. And a bunch of Southerners send him over 100 commemorative canes.
Oh.
Yeah. So John Brown hears about this. And there was also a little raid that kind of had happened, and it was these two things happened in really close proximity to each other. John Brown breaks down, and him and his sons. This is now the John Brown that we're talking about. John Brown, him and his sons, literally, and a couple of freed black slaves, arm themselves with broadswords.
Yes.
Go on to commit the Potawatomi Creek Massacre. They go to 5 different plantations, little small plantations, in the middle of the night, and pull the plantation owners out of their house and hack them into tiny pieces with broadswords, and then display the bodies on the front porch of their houses. Pretty sure he actually brought the families out to lunch. Yes, John Brown was clearly a terrorist. No doubt in my mind. John Brown was a terrorist. He used terror. He was quoted as saying he only killed 5, but 6 were killed in the other massacre, in the other fight, so he didn't feel like he had actually done what he wanted to do. That's who John Brown was. After John Brown's raid, there was this thing that said that on his way from the jailhouse to the gallows, there was this black woman there with a baby. She handed it to John Brown and kissed it on his forehead. That never happened. Really don't think that happened, but he was painted in this Moses-like way, and that just wasn't who he was. So he does this awful act, and in the summer of '56 he hides. And then eventually he leaves, and he goes back east. And this is when he starts planning his raid. So he starts this fundraising campaign, and he's going to Chicago, he's going to Toronto, in Toronto especially, he got up there and just like, I'm gonna free all the slaves! I'm gonna do it! Give me money! Join my army! Like very, very openly. And like 60 people showed up. And he met Frederick Douglass, he met Harriet Tubman, he saw Sojourner Truth speak, he was meeting with all of these people.
Is he doing that while in hiding still?
No, he head out for about, I think 6 months, and then went right back into it.
So the North is just like, that's okay? That's cool that you have people up?
No,
Technology was it back then?
I mean, he was doing it in secret, and he wasn't infamous at this point, because this kind of stuff was happening in Kansas all of the time. Not with broadswords. Was kind of the difference there. And his phrase was that he wanted to take this war to Africa, which I think is an awesome phrase in a way. So his idea is to attack the arsenal on Harper's Ferry. And it's the largest arsenal in the United States at the time. It just has like thousands of guns. And what he wants to do is just start the slave insurrection and slowly take over Virginia. He writes his own constitution. He's staying in Frederick Douglass's attic and writes his own. This is also funny. So he's staying in Frederick Douglass's attic for a little while, and he writes the new constitution, the provisional constitution of Virginia for his provisional army and the provisional people of Virginia. And we only have one letter between Douglass and John Brown. And it was like, while John Brown was staying in the attic, Frederick Douglass wrote him a letter. And then came back to the house to John Brown, and all it said was, John, come down to dinner.
So they like to talk.
What's that?
So they like to talk.
Yeah, exactly. I just think John Brown didn't like people, but Frederick Douglass really liked John Brown. So, you know, he existed by this higher law. He didn't really care about the law, and the law had failed him so many times anyway. And when is violence justifiable? Anyway, so he was trying to raise funds, but the Dred Scott thing had just gone through, and so the North, it was kind of America's first economic panic. The North is saying, you know, the South, you've trusted too much in King Cotton, you're fucking everything up. The South is, you know, telling the North, and they were actually right. They were saying, no, you've been trusting these banks too high, and they've been, anyway. But everybody's blaming each other's economic crisis. So it's really hard for John Brown to get funding for this during his time. So when he's up in I'm sorry, not Toronto, it's Ontario. That's all it says. The Ontario 1855. Douglass is actually up there with them, but the thing also with John Brown, the reason he couldn't get funding is because he didn't want to tell anybody what his plan was. He didn't say Harper's Ferry, he didn't say anything. It was really vague about the whole thing. So he couldn't get any money, and so he hires this guy, Hugh Forbes. And I really want a movie to be made about John Brown, because this guy, Hugh Forbes, is just this character from a film that can't exist. And he was like this soldier of fortune. It was just like wasted, and he just like would do any battle that anybody would pay him for. And he meets John Brown, just like, I've been everywhere, I can do whatever you want. And John Brown's like, okay, you're hired. And the guy sucks. So, you know, but he goes up to Ontario, and most of these people were fugitive slaves, and he's telling them, let's get your families out. Let's go back to the South. We're gonna get all of them out there. No one joins him. He meets with the Secret Six. I mean, not no one, but almost no one. He meets with the Secret Six. One of them's really rich. These 6 white guys that are abolitionists. They give him some funding. And one of the things that happens is that, so he takes this funding, and then he goes, you know, this guy Hugh Forbes is like, I got all this money, what should we spend it on? Hugh Forbes is just like, spears. So John Brown gets this fortune, he gets 2,000 pikes made. And gets them shipped. He like gets this little plot of land in Maryland that's really close to Harper's Ferry, and gets them shipped there, like trained his militia with these pikes. So eventually, so he does this thing, goes back to Kansas though in the winter of '58. And this is awesome. He takes 13 men. Okay, so he basically goes back to Kansas and he frees these slaves. He takes 13 men and they free these slaves together. And it's in Mississippi and it's in the dead of winter and they go to these 3 farms and they free 11 slaves. So in the dead of, they camp out for like until January. And so in the dead of winter, they make this trek of over 1,000 miles up to Canada. First they go to Nebraska, then Iowa. In Iowa, they stop at this town where the mayor gives John Brown a key to the city. And then they get on the railroad, they go to Chicago and then to Detroit, and they're crossing Detroit to Canada, except now it's not 11, it's 12. There's a baby born on the train on the way up there who's named John Brown. Yeah.
When you say free, do you mean like kill the slave owner and?
Actually, in that raid, he only killed one plantation owner.
But I mean like, were they
They were
technically free?
fugitives. He had freed them, but they were
So
fugitives.
it's like saved.
Right, right. But he did it, and so that was kind of awesome. He kind of went back to Canada and was like, I fucking did it. You know what I mean? He's like, I did this. I killed some white people and I freed some black people, and here they are. Hello, Canada. You know, I'm back. So people meet with him again. So he wanted to do the raid in summer '59, but it didn't happen because not enough people showed up. So eventually, finally, he's got 22 men. He decides to raid Harper's Ferry anyway. That horrible thing happened with Hayward. And he stormed the armory with 22 men armed with these spears. But he did this interesting thing, and it's been talked about, like the theories why he did it. So this train comes through, and here's Hayward dying in the train station. Like, you know, what happened? He was just like, oh, this abolitionists and these free slaves are going to come and attack. So the abolitionists stop the train, they're not letting it go, but John Brown lets the train go. Which he gets like shitty historians are like, what a horrible tactical decision or something, but he wasn't a tactician. You know what I mean? He wasn't a soldier. I don't know. Anyway, so the train leaves, and so they get to the next town. The train's like, there's 200 freed slaves, you know, in Harper's Ferry right now. It finally gets to Buchanan. I think it was Buchanan at the time. And it was like, no, there's 500 freed slaves there. And so he just sends his entire, everybody basically goes to Harper's Ferry. And I missed one thing that's kind of cool. So he met with Frederick Douglass right before he was going to go. Frederick Douglass knew it was about to happen. And Frederick Douglass brought this guy with him, Shields Green. Shields Green was a free slave. It was John Brown's last attempt to get Frederick Douglass to go. Frederick Douglass would have died there. I'm happy he didn't go. But Shields Green's quote was, I think I'm going to have to go with the old man. Which I thought was kind of cool. So Green went. So it was seven ex-slaves, or sons of ex-slaves joined him, and a number of his sons. 2 of them are Oberlin graduates. I got a lot of notes in Oberlin. Pretty cool, Oberlin. One of the guys with him escaped. And we don't know, and this is the other thing, and I'm wrapping up here. We don't know his whole plan. We don't really know. We can theorize. It seems like he wanted to start this armed militia and hide out in the mountains and slowly free more slaves until they had this army and just gain. But one of the things that happened is that after he was captured, they went back to this little farm he had in Maryland and found this case, this giant chest just full of maps. All like really intense maps of all over the South, with like little towns X'd out, and, like little notes, like for all of the South. And so when this happened, all of the local newspapers, they all let know, and so these little local newspapers were like, we were in his maps. You know what I mean? Like, it's gonna happen. Just fear. And what also was kind of cool is that Anyway, I guess I got ahead of that. So he was unsuccessful. He was completely outmanned. He was captured. His sons died. One son got away. That son actually moved to Pasadena, California to get as far away from the memory of his father as possibly could. One of his sons, his body was sold to a college, and then during the Civil War, somebody realized whose body it was. It had been preserved. And so that guy took it to his secret lodge, where they used it for like their secret weird things that they did. Waiting for John Brown's wife to like come back to run the trains so they could give it to her.
What were the weird things?
I couldn't find it. A lot of townspeople died in Sharper's Ferry. And so when they finally get John Brown, they cornered him, and the first thing they do is try to run him through with a sword. He's got this giant brass belt buckle on it, so it just hit the brass buckle. I believe that happened, but then later it was like he was protected by some weird glowing thing or something. So now it's just a giant brass buckle. So he gets put in jail, and he just starts writing. He writes over 100 letters because he's building his legacy. He knows he's going to die. There's no way out. And so he just sends these letters all over the place, and his jailer falls in love with him. His jailer, this guy's awesome. He's just excited to die. I've got this quote here that he sent to his wife. "I have been whipped," as the saying goes, "but I'm sure I can recover all the capital I lost on that occasion by that disaster by hanging only a few minutes by the neck, and feel quite determined to make the utmost possible of my defeat." He knew what his death was going to be. He knew he was a martyr already, and so he was sending out these letters to really secure that, secure his legacy. And he was a morbid fucker. That's a morbid sentence to send your wife. So he was hung out in this field. They sent 3,000 troops to guard his execution. And the story was just this huge, massive sensation because it was exactly what the South had feared. One of these crazy abolitionists that write these papers eventually is going to do the thing that they kept talking about. When the Civil War broke out, this song started, which is called John Brown's Body. It eventually became the battle hymn of the Republic. That was sort of turned into this poem, this really short poem that I want to read. Well, this short excerpt of a very long poem that I'd like to read. Where are you? Sorry, not really. Hold on. Here we go. This has been written by Stephen Vincent Benet. It's a 250-page long poem. The law is our yardstick, and it measures well, or well enough, when there are yards to measure. Measure a wave with it, measure fire. Cut up sorrow in inches, weigh content. You can weigh John Brown's body well enough. And how and in what balance do you weigh John Brown? He had no gift for life, no gift to bring life, but his body and a cutting edge. But he knew how to die. It's a really good job summing up John Brown to me. So, if you imagine these people in the Civil War, this union singing about John Brown's body and the importance of his death, everything that he went through. So still, the importance of him is obvious. He was an inspiration. Civil War wouldn't have happened when it did if it wasn't for John Brown. It was going to happen, but it happened when it did because of John Brown. He fueled these people and woke them up and said, die for this. So I left part out of when he was younger. I wanted to leave it for last. So this violent guy.